She stumbled slightly as a polished boot nudged her forward at Silver Ridge Range. Her faded jacket patched at the elbows drew smirks from the crowd of elite marksmen. A young shooter in tactical gear sneered, "Didn't know they let thrift store strays in here." Whispers slithered through the air. Probably lost her way to the cleaning crew. She adjusted her duct-taped rifle case, eyes steady, unmoved. To them, she was a shadow, unworthy of the gleaming lanes. But what they didn't know was her name etched into the range's foundation, and today she'd remind them. If you've ever been judged unfairly, share your thoughts below and stay for a story that'll leave you speechless. Everything gleamed at Silver Ridge Range except her. The lounge sparkled with crystal chandeliers, their light dancing across walnut-paneled walls. Polished trays held bourbon bottles, each positioned like a trophy. Elite marksmen in tailored vests laughed over clinking glasses, their voices sharp with confidence. She stepped inside her worn jacket, brushing against the heavy oak door. No one turned, her boots scuffed and soft-soled, barely whispered on the concrete floor. The air carried a faint tang of leather and gun oil, thick with the weight of privilege. She wasn't supposed to be here, and every glance seemed to know it. The range was a cathedral of precision, nestled in the shadow of Colorado's Rockies. Its halls displayed engraved plaques honoring founders, their names glowing under museum-style spotlights. Digital screens looped wind data and shot groupings a silent hymn to perfection. The crowd was a mix of defense heirs, retired officers, and young sharpshooters with custom gear. They moved with ease, their embroidered jackets flashing sponsor logos. She stood out like a smudge on glass, her jacket patched her rifle case bound with fraying tape. A junior marksman by the leather couches nudged his friend. "Lost tourist," he muttered, barely hiding a smirk. His companion didn't look up, just shrugged. "Someone's got to clean the brass." She kept moving her steps, deliberate as if she'd walked these halls before. Her face was calm, unadorned by makeup, her hair tucked loosely under a faded cap. She carried no badge, no team patch, just the weight of her case, and a quiet that seemed to hum beneath the noise. Near the stairwell, 3 instructors huddled over a tablet discussing trigger pulls. One glanced her way, his eyes narrowing. "They're letting anyone in now," he said, voice low but pointed. The others chuckled, their attention already drifting back to the screen. She passed without a word, her gaze fixed ahead, as if the walls themselves might speak to her. The archive gallery stretched long and narrow, lined with black and white photos of early range founders. Their stern faces stared from polished frames, each name etched in brass. A single plaque, half hidden by a neon energy drink banner, sat unlit at waist height. She paused there, her breath catching for a moment, then moved on. The banner's bolts dug into the wall, careless and bold, as if the name beneath didn't matter. A staffer in a crisp quarter zip brushed past his earpiece, buzzing faintly. He didn't look at her. To him, she was furniture, forgettable, replaceable. Upstairs, the corridor to the viewing decks was alive with chatter. Frame bullseyes hung beside shattered clay targets preserved in resin. A pair of shooters posed for a selfie, their laughter bouncing off the walls. Her figure blurred in the corner of their photo, unnoticed. One typed a caption, "Range Ghost Sighting." Another group lingered by a digital donor wall, gold names cycling slowly on the screen. Hers wasn't there, not anymore. A faded target print hung nearby, its perfect grouping, no wider than a dime, dated 2013, 1,000 meters standard wind. 2 shooters glanced at it then, at her. Fluke shot one, muttered, turning away. She didn't flinch, her hand steady on the case's handle. A woman in a black tactical vest leaned on the deck railing, whispering to a man beside her. "She's still here? Someone tell her the exit's that way." Her voice was light, almost playful, but it carried a blade. The man smirked, sipping his coffee. "Let her wander. She'll leave when she figures it out." She passed beneath them, her shadow fleeting on the polished floor. An older staffer, arms full of forms, dropped a pen as he hurried by. It rolled toward her. She bent, picked it up, and handed it back. He muttered a thanks, eyes already elsewhere, missing the weight in her gaze. At the corridor's end, a glass door read, "Founders Range Authorized Only." No one stopped her. No one thought they needed to. She pushed it open, the hinges silent, and stepped into the light. The range beyond was a sea of steel and glass, its lanes gleaming under the midday sun. The crowd's laughter faded behind her, but the air grew heavier, charged with something unspoken. A lone security guard by the door met her eyes for a split second, his nod so slight it might have been a trick of the light. She tightened her grip on the case and walked on the gravel, crunching softly under her boots. Who invited the thrift store to the range? The words sliced through the chatter at Silver Ridge Range, sharp and deliberate, as she stepped onto the gravel path leading to the firing lanes. The crowd's laughter rippled like a wave, not loud but relentless, as if her presence was a punchline they couldn't resist. Her faded jacket hung loose, the duct-taped rifle case swinging slightly in her grip. She walked alone, the sun glinting off steel rails around her, while the elite marksmen and their entourages watched with smirks. The air buzzed with their amusement, a cruel hum that seemed to cling to her like dust. The open qualifier was a spectacle, a showcase for the best defense airs, sponsored sharpshooters and retired officers with custom gear. They lounged on the viewing deck, sipping drinks their tailored vests, flashing logos of tactical brands. She was an anomaly, a smudge on their polished world. A young shooter in a black cap, leaning against a bench, nudged his friend and pointed at her case. "That tape's older than my rig," he said loud enough to carry. His friend laughed, pulling out a phone to record. The live stream's caption flashed, "Vintage vibes, wrong venue." Comments poured in, each one sharper than the last. "Grandma's got a BB gun, bet she misses the target entirely." She kept moving her boots steady on the packed gravel. A woman in tactical sleeves, her hair pulled tight in a bun, raised her voice as she passed. "Hey, the kiddie range is down the road." The crowd erupted, a low swell of chuckles spreading from the benches to the deck. Someone tossed a plastic token toward her, the kind used for range bets. It skidded across the ground and stopped near her foot, scrawled with cleanup crew and marker. She didn't look down. Her hand tightened briefly on the case's handle, then relaxed. The token lay there ignored as she stepped over it. Near the scoring tent, a staffer with a clipboard thrust it toward her, the signature line blank. "Sign here if you're actually shooting," he said, his tone dripping with doubt. She wrote 4 quick strokes, her name unreadable to him. He glanced at it, then at her, his lip twitching. "Good luck," he muttered, stepping back. Another shooter, a man with a carbon fiber rifle, leaned forward and snapped a photo. His caption read, "Before the crash and burn." The crowd's whispers grew bolder, a chorus of slights. "She's here for the free coffee," one said. "Nah, she's lost from a reenactment fair." Another added, sparking more laughter. The announcer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, flat and mocking. "Entry 12, guest shooter, no team affiliation. Open qualifier, 1,000 meters. The number glowed on the digital scoreboard, stark red, entry 12. No name, no badge, just a placeholder. A young woman on the deck raised her phone, panning it across the path. $5 says she doesn't even load the rifle right," she called out, her voice bright with malice. A man near the tower shouted back, "I'll take that bet. 10 says she trips going prone." The crowd roared their amusement, a living thing wrapping around her like a noose. She reached the firing platform, the steel mat cold under the midday sun. The wind curled down from the Rockies, tugging at the frayed edges of her jacket. Around her, shooters adjusted precision scopes, their assistants murmuring wind data. Her case looked like a relic beside their gleaming setups. A shooter to her left, his rig worth thousands, exaggerated a stretch and groaned loudly. "Hope she's got earplugs for that antique," he said, winking at the crowd. Phones tilted toward her streams, lighting up with laughing emojis. A comment scrolled fast. "This is gonna be a train wreck." The insults didn't stop. They came from every angle, bench's deck, even the staff. A range tech checking sensors leaned toward his partner. "We'll need a broom for her ego." "After this," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. Another tossed a paper cup toward her station, letting it roll to a stop near her mat. She didn't react. Her eyes stayed forward, scanning the lane ahead, where the 1,000-meter target stood like a distant speck. The crowd's laughter was a constant now, a dull roar that drowned out the wind. Then came the final blow. The woman in the tactical vest, now standing by the tower, called out, her voice clear and cutting. "You're not a shooter, lady. You're a nobody who wandered into the wrong game." The words landed like a slap, silencing the chatter for a moment. Every eye turned to her, waiting for a flinch, a tear, a retreat. She stood still, her breath, even her hands resting lightly on the case. The crowd held its breath, expecting her to crumble. But she didn't. She lifted her chin just a fraction and opened the case's latches, one click, then another. The sound was small, but it cut through the tension like a blade. She wasn't broken. Not yet. The laughter faded. but she stood alone, a shadow swallowed by the brilliance of Silver Ridge Range. The crowd's eyes had moved on their chatter, rising again like a tide, as if she'd never been there. Her boots pressed into the gravel, the duct-taped rifle case still at her side, its weight a quiet anchor. The firing platform stretched before her, cold and unyielding, while the wind whispered down from the Rockies, carrying the faint scent of pine and gunpowder. She was invisible now, not worth a second glance, and the silence around her felt heavier than their mockery. She stood still, her breath slow, her hands resting on the case's frayed handle. Inside her, a storm churned, though her face betrayed nothing. Was she wrong to come here? The thought clawed at her, sharp and familiar, like a voice she'd fought to silence years ago. She'd known places like this, rooms too bright, voices too loud, where she was always the outsider. Her mind drifted to a memory, sharp as a blade. She was 16, standing in a dusty field, her mother's old rifle heavy in her arms. "Hold steady, Clara," her mother had said, her voice warm, but firm. "The world will try to shake you, but you aim true." That rifle was gone, now sold to pay bills after her mother passed, but its lessons lingered, etched into her bones. She blinked, the memory fading, leaving a hollow ache. The crowd's words echoed in her mind. Nobody lost wrong place. Had she been foolish to think she could walk among them? Her fingers brushed the edge of her jacket, patched from years of wear, and she wondered if they were right. Maybe she didn't belong, not here, not anywhere like this. The platform felt vast, the target 1,000 meters away, a cruel reminder of how far she'd always been from fitting in. She saw herself as they did, worn out of place, a relic in a world of polish and precision. The doubt pressed against her chest, each breath a struggle to keep it at bay. She closed her eyes for a moment, the wind cool against her skin. Her mother's voice lingered, a faint echo. "You don't need their permission to be enough." She opened her eyes, her gaze falling to the case. Inside was more than a rifle. It was years of practice in empty fields, nights studying wind charts by lamplight, moments when she'd chosen to stand tall despite the world's weight. She wasn't here to prove them wrong, not really. She was here for herself, for the girl who'd once aimed at rusted cans and dreamed of something bigger. Her hand moved almost without thought to the thin chain around her neck, hidden beneath her collar. A small silver pendant her mother's pressed against her skin, warm from her pulse. She touched it, her fingers steady, and something shifted. The doubt didn't vanish, but it loosened its grip like a knot slowly unraveling. She wasn't broken, not by their words, not by this place. Her shoulders straightened just a fraction, and she knelt beside the case. The latches clicked open, the sound, soft, but deliberate, a quiet defiance. She wasn't ready to walk away, not yet. The crowd's noise swelled again, oblivious to her. The other shooters prepared their rigs, their assistants calling out data, their world spinning on without her. But she didn't need their eyes, their approval. She had her own. The platform stretched ahead, the target waiting a speck against the ridge. Her breath steadied, matching the rhythm of the wind. She wasn't invisible, not to herself. And as she reached for the rifle, her fingers brushed the worn notebook inside the case, its pages filled with her own calculations, her own truth waiting to be spoken. No one noticed she hadn't flinched. Clara knelt by her rifle case. The latches opened, her hands steady as she lifted the worn rifle under the harsh glare of Silver Ridge Range. The crowd's chatter hummed, their mockery fading into a careless drone, certain she'd falter. The firing platform gleamed, a stage of steel and precision, but her presence felt like a crack in their perfect world. The wind curled down from the Rockies, sharp with pine tugging at her faded jacket. The 1,000-meter target stood distant, a speck against the ridge, and something in the air shifted, a stillness that whispered she wasn't done. She moved with quiet purpose, her boots scuffing softly on the gravel. The rifle, its wooden stock scratched but polished by years of care, settled into her hands like an old friend. The scope dulled at the edges, caught the sun in a brief flash. She pulled a small notebook from the case, its pages yellowed, filled with handwritten ballistic notes, angles wined, holds her own meticulous script. A shooter nearby snickered, adjusting his carbon fiber rig. "Hope she's got a prayer to go with that relic," he muttered, sparking a ripple of laughs. Phones tilted, streams buzzing with comments, antiques about to flop. She ignored them, flipping to a marked page, her eyes scanning a single line before she closed the book. The scoreboard blinked red, entry 12. No name, no team, just a number pulsing in the midday heat. The announcer's voice crackled, tinged with amusement. Entry 12, guest shooter, 1,000-meter qualifier. Let's see what happens. The crowd leaned in, ready for a spectacle, their laughter a low hum. Clara lowered herself to the mat, the steel cold against her knees. Her left arm braced the stock, her right hand found the grip, her cheek pressed to the rifle, a rhythm carved into her muscle memory. The wind brushed her face, and she exhaled slow and even, as if the world beyond the scope didn't exist. The first shot came like a whisper. The trigger broke cleanly. The report sharp, but small, swallowed by the vast range. A red dot flared on the target screen, dead center, a perfect bullseye. The crowd's chatter faltered, a few heads turning. No one clapped. She cycled the bolt smooth and unhurried, the second round sliding into place. Another breath, another shot. The screen blinked, another dot stacked atop the first, invisible in its precision. A man on the deck set his drink down, untouched. The third shot followed, then the fourth, each landing with surgical accuracy, the cluster so tight it seemed impossible. The tech at the scoring tent blinked, resetting the system to confirm. By the fifth shot, the range was quiet. The crowd's amusement had evaporated, replaced by a tense collective stillness. Clara didn't pause, didn't look up. Her fingers moved with practiced ease, loading the sixth round. The wind shifted, but her scope barely twitched. Another shot, another perfect hit. The scoreboard operator stopped switching lanes, the feed locked on her. The seventh, eighth, ninth shots came in steady succession, each one a silent rebuke, the red cluster glowing like a wound on the screen. The crowd didn't breathe. The 10th shot fired, and for a moment the system lagged. Then the board flashed 100. No decimals, no errors. A perfect score. She sat up, her rifle resting flat on the mat, her hands still. The crowd was a statue gallery, phones forgotten, eyes wide. A staffer fumbled his clipboard, the pages fluttering. The woman in the tactical vest who'd called her a nobody gripped the tower railing, her face pale. Whispers broke the silence, urgent and low. "Who is she?" A range tech scrolled frantically on his tablet, his fingers shaking. The announcer's voice returned, hesitant. Entry 12, Clara Hensley. The name hung in the air, unfamiliar to most, until an older staffer near the donor wall froze. He stepped forward, his eyes darting to a plaque half hidden by a sponsor banner. He peeled back the vinyl, revealing polished brass, Clara Hensley design, lead founding contributor, Trajectory Systems. A murmur rippled through the crowd, sharp and electric. The truth landed like a stone. She wasn't just a shooter. She'd built the range's scoring system, designed its lanes, funded its foundation. The man with the carbon fiber rig stared at his phone, the stream still running, the comments now flooding with shock. The woman in the vest tried to laugh, her voice cracking. "Must be a mistake," she said, but no one echoed her. The staffer at the tent looked away, his clipboard trembling. Clara stood folding her mat with care. She looked at the crowd, her gaze steady, unflinching. "Next time," she said, her voice low, "but clear check the names on the walls before you laugh." She turned, her boots crunching on the gravel, and walked off the platform. The crowd parted, their silence louder than their earlier jeers. The scoreboard still glowed, red digits locked on her perfect 100, a testament etched in light. The air held her presence heavy and unshakable as she moved toward the range's edge, her truth now undeniable. The crowd's silence was heavier than their laughter had ever been. Clara walked away from the firing platform at Silver Ridge Range, her boots crunching softly on the gravel, her rifle case swinging lightly in her hand. The scoreboard's red digits still burned, 100, a perfect score, unyielding in the midday sun. The elite marksman defense heirs and staff stood frozen, their phones lowered, their drinks forgotten. The woman in the tactical vest who'd branded her a nobody stared at the ground, her knuckles white on the railing. No one spoke, but the air thrummed with a truth too sharp to ignore. She was no stranger here. The range felt smaller now, its steel and glass less imposing. Clara's name, revealed on the brass plaque, hung like a shadow over the crowd. The woman in the vest, Lauren tried to regain her footing. She forced a laugh, her voice thin. "Well, that was unexpected," she said, glancing at the others for support. No one met her eyes. A young shooter nearby, who'd streamed her flop earlier, slipped his phone into his pocket, his face flushed. "The man with the carbon fiber rig," Ethan muttered to his friend. "I didn't know," but his words dissolved into the quiet. The crowd's unity, once fueled by mockery, had fractured, leaving only awkward glances and shifting feet. An older staffer, gray hair peeking from under his cap, moved toward the donor wall. His hands, steady from years of handling range logs, trembled slightly as he unbolted the sponsor banner, fully letting it fall to the ground. The plaque gleamed now, Clara Hensley's name, catching the light. Design, lead founding contributor, Trajectory Systems. He stepped back, his jaw tight, and muttered to a colleague, "We should have checked the records." The colleague nodded, eyes down, and began typing on his tablet, flagging Lauren's conduct for review. No one said it aloud, but Lauren's name would not appear on next season's instructor list. The crowd's hypocrisy surfaced like cracks in dry earth. A woman who'd tossed the cleanup crew token approached Clara, her smile nervous. "I didn't mean anything by it," she said, her voice too loud. "You were amazing out there." Clara's gaze met hers, calm but unyielding, and she said nothing. The woman faltered, stepping back, her apology hanging unanswered. Another shooter who'd laughed at the kiddie range jab tried to start a conversation with a staffer, pretending he'd always admired the range's history. The staffer turned away, busying himself with a clipboard. The air grew thick with their discomfort, their earlier confidence now a weight they couldn't shrug off. A retired colonel, his presence unnoticed until now, stepped forward from the edge of the viewing deck. His face was lined, his posture rigid, a man who'd seen ranges like this built and broken. He approached the plaque, his boots clicking on the concrete, and stood before Clara's name for a long moment. Then he turned to her, still standing near the platform's edge, and gave a single nod, slow, deliberate, the kind of respect that needed no words. The crowd watched, their breaths shallow, as he returned to the deck without a sound. His gesture was a verdict, and it settled over them like dust. Clara packed her gear with the same care she'd shown unpacking it. Her rifle rested in its case, the latches clicking shut, each sound a quiet assertion of her presence. She didn't gloat, didn't linger to savor their unease. "I didn't come to tear anyone down," she said softly, almost to herself, as she folded her mat. "I came to shoot." Her voice carried just far enough a gentle rebuke that stung more than a shout. She slung the case over her shoulder and walked toward the range's exit, her faded jacket catching the breeze. A young range tech who'd mocked her antique held the gate open. His eyes averted a silent apology she didn't need. The crowd began to disperse, their voices subdued, their laughter a distant memory. Some lingered by the plaque, reading her name as if seeing it for the first time. Others packed their gear, their movements hurried, eager to escape the weight of their misjudgment. The scoreboard reset, its red digits fading, but the memory of her shots lingered, etched into the range's steel and stone. Clara's steps faded into the gravel path, her figure growing smaller against the Rockies' shadow, but her presence remained a quiet force that had reshaped the air. The range was hers, always had been, and no one could unsee it now. Clara had walked through fire, but for the first time in years, the weight of judgment didn't burn. She stepped away from Silver Ridge Range, the gravel path fading behind her, the Rockies' shadow softening in the late afternoon light. Her faded jacket swayed in the breeze, her rifle case a quiet companion at her side. She'd once believed she needed their approval, those polished marksmen, their gleaming world to feel whole. The memory of their laughter, their cruel tokens lingered like a bruise, but it no longer defined her. She'd stood in their arena not to win their praise, but to reclaim her own. Her hand brushed the silver pendant at her neck, her mother's voice echoing softly. "You aim true, Clara, no matter who's watching." She hadn't come to Silver Ridge to prove them wrong. She'd come to honor that girl in the dusty field, the one who'd aimed at rusted cans and dreamed without limits. The crowd's mockery had nearly drowned her, but it also reminded her of the strength she'd built in silence, shot by shot, year by year. She didn't need their names on a screen, their applause, or their regret. She needed only the truth she'd carved into the range's foundation, a truth that stood taller than their scorn. She paused at the range's edge, the sun warm on her face, and looked back once. The donor wall gleamed, her name now lit a quiet testament. A young girl in worn boots stood there, tracing the brass with a careful finger, her eyes bright with something new. Clara smiled, small but real, and turned away. She wasn't invisible anymore, not to herself, not to those who'd come after. Her steps carried her forward, each one lighter, her pendant catching the light like a promise kept. If Clara's story stirred something in, you share it below or pass it on to someone who's ever felt unseen. Subscribe for more stories where quiet strength speaks loudest, and let's keep lifting voices that deserve to be heard.